The Browns should consider talking to Deion Sanders about their vacant head coach job. I'll explain why coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast. I'm proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. The Browns should absolutely be trying to have a conversation with Deion Sanders about their head coaching job. I'll explain why. Plus, Mike McDaniel bows out of the Browns search, which means this thing is far from over. And the biggest reason why I would want somebody like Sean McDermott over, say, a Grant Udinski. I do want to thank you for being in every day with the Locked On Browns podcast, making us your first listen every single day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. And that's all thanks to you. Now listen, before you turn this episode off, run for the hills, say Spencer's talking crazy, the Browns should not be talking to Deion Sanders. Let me explain myself a little bit here, because I understand that the Shedeur Sanders phenomenon that the Browns are living in right now is, it's a lot in terms of like internally with the organization and even externally, like the conversations that are had, and there's a lot that comes with that. And so Deion is kind of at the top of all this, where he is such a character, such a figure, such a football icon, that there's even more attention that comes with that. Maybe you don't think the Browns are ready for this, but here's what I would say. Talking to Deion Sanders about the head coaching job, it doesn't mean he's going to get the job. It doesn't mean you actually have to hire him for the job. And frankly, like right now, like a year ago, I think Deion was about as hot as a name as you could find at any level of football. Not just in terms of like stardom, but in terms of like actually being a name that was viable in coaching searches, and that teams actually would consider hiring, whether it's college, NFL, or otherwise, because of just everything he brings from like an attention standpoint. And players do seem like they want to play for him. The transfer portal and the guys he's gotten to go there, and certain players who just want to be part of that entire aura that exists around Deion, like it's a real thing. So I'm not saying it's not, there's not some viability there, but I do think like the way that the last season went with Colorado, largely with Deion's health being at the center of it, and I think that's probably the biggest concern with hiring somebody like Deion Sanders right now is like his health and how long is he going to really be able to do this? I know he sort of powered through a Colorado season last year. It was tough to see and tough to know that like everything he was dealing with. And I think that would be concerning to any team. Like, how long is he going to be doing this for? Is it the best decision for his health? Like, is that going to sort of be something that becomes a hindrance to him at some point? He's going to have to step away. So I feel for Deion in that regard, because a year ago he was about as hot a name as there could be, and now I think because of the health stuff and the season Colorado had, he slipped to more of like a behind the scenes role, or not role, but more of a behind the scenes figure. And when it comes to the coach cycles and actually being somebody teams would consider. So yes, that's all part of this, and those are probably all fair reasons. Or the health part, most notably, is probably a fair reason why maybe a team wouldn't want to hire him. But the reason I say that you need to have a conversation with Deion is, and this goes back to what I talked about early on in this process, right? Sometimes you have interviews with head coaches or potential candidates for a head coach to sort of pick their brain and get a sense of like how they would do things, or the thought process on certain players or organizational structure or whatever that sort of comes to mind. And it's just to kind of get, it's like a fact-finding mission in a way, right? Like we talked about that with John Harbaugh a ton. Like even if you can't hire John Harbaugh, he doesn't want to come to Cleveland, just get him in the building to pick his brain about how he sees football or how he sees the dynamics of an organization. That stuff can matter. And so, and as I think about where the Browns are at from a quarterback standpoint, I've talked about this on the show, you've heard me, there is a legitimate world, and it feels like the most likely path they're going to have to take, where Shedeur Sanders is your quarterback this upcoming season. Now, he's the guy that's kind of leading the charge or part of a competition to be the starter, and he wins it, and you want to put him in the best position to be successful. I don't know what kind of conversations the organization's already had with Deion through last year's pre-draft process and all those things. But I think it's probably valuable to get him in the building, even just for a conversation, whether or not you plan on hiring him as a head coach or not, to just pick his brain about, like, listen, how can we best set Shedeur up for success? I understand, like, there was a bad connotation associated with the idea that Shedeur's never played for anybody except his dad. But that doesn't have to be a negative if you use it to your advantage, or you get a sense of, like, what that looked like, how Deion handled his own child, his own kid, his own kin as a coach, where you have to make tough decisions about the roster and all these different things, and how he, coached him versus was a father to him. I think all those things are valuable, and it's just valuable insight into the guy that might be your starting quarterback next year, or for the foreseeable future, or for years to come if he pans out. Like, it doesn't hurt to chat with him and just get a better idea of, if we're moving forward with Shedeur as our guy, or we want to move forward with Shedeur as our guy, what do we need to do to support him better? What does the next coach need to do to get the most out of him, to set him up for success? I think at the very least, that's a valuable conversation that comes out of a head coach interview with Deion Sanders, because this might be your pathway forward at the quarterback position next year is Shedeur Sanders, and then whatever else the room kind of looks like around him, an open competition, whatever, like, and so getting off on the right foot with the next coach, before they even hire the guy, or like getting off on the right foot with Shedeur, with whoever ends up being the coach, I think could go a long way in sort of determining, how much success he's going to have, and how to utilize and take advantage of the player that you have, while also not letting the outside stuff that surrounds Shedeur, all the noise and the conversations and the following he has, become a distraction within the locker room or within your team or whatever it might be, because Deion had to deal with that as well, like with himself and his son, because he's such a larger than life figure. There's players in that Colorado locker room that have to be willing to sort of had to be willing to sort of understand, like, what was going to come with all those things, and how did he manage that? How did he manage all the outside stuff? I'm not saying he's the perfect choice to be the head coach of the Cleveland Browns. I'm not even saying that they have to give him the job. I just think it's an easy way to get him in the building for a conversation and talk to him about these things, and be able to kind of, there's a lot going on when a player is about to be drafted, right? Like the pre-draft process, all the training that goes into that, the conversations with different coaches, and you're trying to sort of map out your roadmap to how you're going to draft guys and what you want your roster to look like. There's a lot of preparation that goes into that. You don't always have time to maybe have these in-depth conversations. This is an opportunity to do that in your building over the course of a day as you host them on an interview, and just kind of get a sense of, hey, what do you think about this situation? What do you think about your son as a quarterback? How can we make him more successful at the NFL level? What makes him tick that we haven't maybe come to find yet? And kind of go from there. Like, if they're going to be invested in this thing, if they're invested in trying to see if it works next year, you might as well do everything you can to make sure Shedeur is in the best situation possible and can be set up for success. And there's no better way to do that than talk to the guy who was his coach for all those years, and his dad, frankly, which also matters, and get a sense of, what can we do to help him succeed? I think it's worth it. Again, it doesn't mean it ends with Deion being the head coach of the Cleveland Browns. It just can be, as many of these interviews can sometimes be, a fact-finding conversation to learn more about the quarterback that you have and what are the best ways to support him. It doesn't hurt, and that's my main point here. Talking to Deion also helps the Browns because, listen, Mike McDaniel is now out, and they're going to need another candidate to come in to interview over the course of the next week or so. We'll talk about what this means for the timeline on this thing, because I think it's far from over. They are far from concluding this coaching search, and we'll talk about it coming up on the Locked On Browns podcast. Kicking off the year feeling good is always the goal, right? And honestly, hydration is the easiest win. When I stay on top of it, my energy, focus, and mood all level up. But let's be real. Plain water doesn't always get the job done, especially when you're grinding through long days, hitting the gym, or just trying to stay consistent with your health goals. That's where DripDrop comes in. Doctor-developed, proven fast hydration that helps your body and mind work faster, think clearer, focus, better energy, elevated mood, even that fresh skin, Glow. I love that it uses a precise ratio of electrolytes and glucose for rapid absorption, delivering 3 times the electrolytes and half the sugar of leading sports drinks. I've been sick. You could tell in my voice over the last week or so. Using DripDrop to make sure I kept my hydration up and got through this cold as quickly as possible has been a game changer. Right now, DripDrop is offering our podcast listeners 20% off your first order. Go to DripDrop.com, use promo code LOCKEDONNFL. That's DripDrop.com, promo code LOCKEDONNFL for 20% off. Stock up now at DripDrop.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL. What if sports were traded like markets? Now you can put your sports IQ to work in real time with Robinhood prediction markets. It's not you against the house. It's you participating in a live market. You can buy or sell your positions live all game long. Use your sports knowledge in moments that matter. Robinhood prediction markets changes the game. It's people moving the action. So when the momentum shifts, you move with it. I always knew the game, but never had a dynamic way to apply that knowledge. Now I can actually take part in a live market powered by the people. You're no longer just a spectator. Play by play, you decide. Trade every play with Robinhood now, available across the U.S. Just download the Robinhood app now to begin. Futures and cleared swaps trading involves significant risk and is not appropriate for everyone. Event contracts are offered by Robinhood Derivatives, LLC, a registered future commissions merchant and swap firm. So Mike McDaniel bowed out of the Browns head coach search on Tuesday, officially ending his part in this process. He was supposed to come in on Wednesday, today, for an in-person interview with the franchise. It was going to be the third one that the Browns were going to have this week. And now that all goes out the window because he accepted and took the Los Angeles Chargers OC job. And this is always the problem with these things is like, you know, these guys are fielding offers all kinds of different places. And while I'm not saying he didn't want the Browns job or he wasn't genuinely interested in the Browns job, but when when he surveys the landscape, I'm sure he understood like he's in this coaching search with a number of other guys. And if he doesn't get picked, like he does want his pick of the litter at these OC jobs that he was also interviewing for or linked to. And so understanding that, I can understand where he probably went to a place like LA, gets enamored with the idea of like, hey, I got Justin Herbert here. I got this guy here. I feel good about working on Harbaugh's staff. And you didn't want to leave the building because you didn't want to risk missing out on that if you stayed in a search for someone else that maybe isn't as ideal of a situation. Or, frankly, like, listen, here's the other thing. How many coaches get like a third chance, right? Like, you kind of only get 2 chances at this. Look at Josh McDaniels, for example. Funny that their names are similar. He got 2 shots. He's not getting another head coaching job. He can probably stay in New England and retire the OC there forever, but he's not getting another head coaching job. And so those things matter. Like, those decisions matter about, like, just kind of the projection of your career and where you're going to end up. And maybe he felt like, you know what, a year away as an OC where I can just focus on the X's and O's, sort of, clean my name a little bit because I don't think people think it ended completely terribly in Miami. Look at the way they finished the season. And clearly he still had interest around the league. But I can understand where maybe it was just like a situation where, this was maybe the right call for now. Take a year sort of to step aside from being a head coach and see if you can get back out there in a year or 2 from now and really go for an opportunity that you kind of learn from your first time around and you can have the best chance to succeed somewhere else. Like I don't hate that thought process there for him. Now the problem is it kind of now holds up the Browns search for a head coach in general for a couple reasons. I think Mike McDaniel was like a legitimate contender for this job. I think they were trying to, get a sense of whether or not he'd fit and all that. I think that all I've heard is that they think very highly of him within the organization. So I do think there was like legitimate interest there by them to potentially hire Mike McDaniel and that he was going to be in this process up until the bitter end. And it was just going to kind of come down to who they liked more of a couple of different guys. But also it holds things up because we know every team that's hiring a coach, GM, etc., has to fulfill the Rooney Rule. And right now, the Browns haven't fulfilled even half of the Rooney Rule, which is 2 minority or female candidates for any of these, big-time jobs at the NFL level. McDaniel was going to be the first of those on Wednesday. The second, in theory, was supposed to be Nate Scheelhaase, who can't talk to teams till next week because obviously he's on the Rams staff. Rams are playing in the NFC Championship game, so he has to wait to take interviews until next Monday, the 26th. So understanding that, like, now the Browns only have one candidate on their on their list right now that is technically a quote unquote minority candidate. And so in order to fulfill that part of the requirement, they're going to have to bring another candidate in. So that's where I say, this thing is far from over, and then it's going to take some time before they actually figure out get the answer to the question of who's going to be their head coach. They have 2 more interviews this week. Jesse Minter is going to be on Thursday for an in-person interview. Grant Udinski is going to be on Friday for an in-person interview. And then Scheelhaase is supposed to be sometime next week. So that leaves you with 5 candidates you've interviewed. There would be one that fits that checks that first box of the Rooney Rule. So they have to bring somebody else in. And on top of that, like, it was going to go into next week anyway, because I think they do really want to talk to Nate Scheelhaase. And they have to talk to Nate Scheelhaase, again, per the Rooney Rule. But now, like, you have to find somebody else to bring in to also make sure that you get the Rooney Rule fulfilled. I don't know who that's going to be. I will say, off the first conversation we had on this episode, Deion Sanders would also fill that need for you as well if you were going to actually bring him in for an in-person interview. So that kind of mitigates that problem as well for you, on top of getting some great insight, as I alluded to, into Shedeur Sanders, what makes him tick, how to set him up for success. So I think it's kind of a kill 2 birds with 1 stone type of thing, because you get some great information out of it, and you can sort of fulfill and continue completing and rolling through your coaching search. But beyond that, like, if you thought this was just going to be over, in short order, and the Browns are going to get this thing sort of finalized, it feels like it's at least rolling into next week. And now here's where the problem is, though. For a while, it felt like the Browns were sort of talking to people that were different than a lot of these other teams were talking to. And there's been 10 jobs now that have become open. And for the most part, like, the jobs that have been filled were with coaches that the Browns weren't really interested in per se anyway. Harbaugh was maybe the one that they showed interest in, but Harbaugh goes to the Giants. Obviously, they weren't going to rehire Kevin Stefanski. He goes to the Falcons. Robert Saleh, they never expressed any interest, it seems, in Robert Saleh. He was never even in for a virtual interview, who now goes to the Titans. And you had Miami fill their sort of they filled their job with Halfley the other day. And so those jobs have all sort of been filled. That leaves you now with 6 jobs that are open. And there's been some overlap, but it has kind of felt like the Browns have talked to some different candidates than even some of the other teams that are still left that are out there right now when it comes to this coaching search. So now what you run into as this thing is going to likely linger into next week is, like, do you worry about other teams plucking your candidates? And the reason I bring this up is, like, the Bills, for example, they now want to talk to Grant Udinski. They're now on the Grant Udinski train. For a while, the Browns were the only team really interested in him. Now all of a sudden the Bills get thrown into the mix because they fired Sean McDermott. They want to have a conversation with him. And then you're talking about, like, attractiveness of jobs. That is where, like, if a Udinski has multiple options, would you rather work with Josh Allen or go to a team that has kind of a quarterback situation that they're still navigating and trying to figure out? I think that's an easy answer. So that's maybe the trouble you're going to run into here. But again, the big takeaway from the Mike McDaniel bowing out part of this is this thing's not going to be over at the end of this week by any stretch. It was never going to be over by the end of the week anyway, because they were always going to plan on talking to Nate Scheelhaase next week. But now you need to find another candidate to be part of this conversation for you, who's of the minority sort of background, or a female candidate, so that you can complete the Rooney Rule. I don't know who that is, what that looks like. Maybe it's, and here's the other thing, like, no matter who they have in at this point to fulfill the Rooney Rule, it's going to feel like a disingenuous interview. That's just, and that's kind of, that's the sad part of the Rooney Rule, is that sometimes you get these, like, faux interviews with people that aren't really meant to that aren't really meant to, like, we're going to hire you. It's just kind of like check a box and have a conversation with a guy that maybe you like. And I hate that about the Rooney Rule, but I also think the Rooney Rule is very, very necessary. So it's kind of like the give and take of it in the NFL in general. But I don't know who that is. Like, I don't know if you go talk to a Raheem Morris, who was just fired by the Falcons, right? And get him in the building. So maybe there's, like, an up-and-comer that you can talk to. There's options, but obviously at this point it's going to look disingenuous because I think at this point, the list that you know about, the 5 guys that are now coming in for in-person interviews, minus Mike McDaniel, which made it 5, are the guys that they, I think, were legitimately interested in for this job. Anybody you kind of add to it now, unless it's like a Sean McDermott who came available obviously very late in this process, it's going to seem like you're just trying to sort of check that box. So it's the unfortunate part of the Rooney Rule, but it is going to have to be fulfilled in order for the Browns to finish this search. And so don't expect this thing to be over. It's going to linger to next week and maybe beyond if they can't fulfill all the requirements and get all their candidates interviewed the way that they need to and they want to. So we'll see what unfolds the coming week or so. But as things stand right now, a little bit of a speed bump, if you will, in this process for the Cleveland Browns with Mike McDaniel bowing out of the search. I talked about Sean McDermott. I also talked about Grant Udinski. This applies to the young candidates in general, though. I'm going to give you the biggest reason why I would want Sean McDermott over one of these young guys, and we'll talk about it coming up next in the Locked On Browns podcast. We've reached conference championship week, and FanDuel is officially in playoff mode. Every game day during the NFL playoffs, FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in on the action, because right now, every NFL playoff game day, FanDuel users get a profit boost pack waiting for them inside the app. Each game day, you'll see a pack loaded with multiple profit boosts that you can apply to the bets that you like the most. Open your profit boost pack first thing on game day and see what boosts you want to apply. Maybe you're looking at Patriots, Broncos. Broncos at home are 5.5-point underdogs, and you don't like that line because, well, the Broncos are at home even though they're starting Jarrett Stidham. Play it on that. Maybe you like Rams Seahawks over because those two teams can certainly score some points. The Seahawks just put up 41 last week. You can apply it however you so choose. It lets you lean into your game day instincts, whether you're backing momentum, defense, quarterback play, or coaching. Every play feels bigger, and the boosts help your bets feel that way too. You make your picks, then apply the profit boost, go after even bigger payouts while the playoffs continue rolling. So visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and grab your profit boost pack every NFL playoff game day. If you've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit, you know just how important that is. When you want candidates that truly match what you're looking for, you need to trust Indeed sponsored jobs. Hiring Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed's sponsored jobs puts your post at the top of the page to help you reach the right candidates faster. Instead of struggling to get your post seen, Indeed sponsored jobs helps your listing stand out and reach quality candidates faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored job posted directly on Indeed are 90% more likely to report a hire than non-sponsored jobs. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all the right boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of our show can get $75 in sponsored jobs credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. All right, so as we think even more about this coach search and it rolls on deeper into this week, and there has been some early reporting that the Browns are at least doing their homework, per se, on Sean McDermott as a potential candidate to fill this void. And I already went on my whole soliloquy on Tuesday about why Sean McDermott's the perfect coach for this team and what they need right now as a franchise and a team. And I stand by those comments because I think Sean McDermott is the perfect fit for this team and gives the Browns the notoriety and the turnaround that they've wanted and the stability that they've been looking for all these years. He can provide that for you. And so when I think about, or for this organization, when I think about why I lean McDermott over even one of these young guys, there's a couple things that come to mind. Because here's the thing, like, I subscribe, and I do really like, I like Grant Udinski a lot. I think he fits the mold of what you're looking for. I'm not just out here getting excited about like him talking about football, because I think most coaches should be able to talk about football in a way that's educational and can teach people. That's why you're a coach. But it does seem like, he's this innovative up and coming mind. Really liked what the Liam Cohen system and his offense down in Jacksonville did this year with Trevor Lawrence and sort of turning him around and getting him back on track in his career. Obviously, he comes from the McVay tree, and you're always looking for the next Sean McVay. And I feel, and this can be applied to Nate Scheelhaase as well. I like what the Rams bring to the table and how they utilize their wide receivers and how they utilize different things offensively to take advantage of mismatches, like we talked about yesterday with Lance Reisland. There's a lot to like about both these guys. And like schematically from an X's and O's standpoint, I would be okay with either of them getting the job and sort of blazing this bright new future with them. But here's what I would say. It's okay to admit this too. Like there is that question mark piece of, can they lead a team? Can they be that CEO that you need to be a head coach? Like we talk about this all the time. Some guys are just better as coordinators and play callers and schemers and X's and O's, and some guys are better as head coaches. It's the nature of the beast. I would say here's a perfect example. Hugh Jackson was an unmitigated failure and flame out of a head coach here in Cleveland. He was awful, but there is a lot of respect around the league for him as an offensive mind. And I think you saw that when he was with Cincinnati for those years where the Bengals offense was always solid. Like they were always a good offense. That's why he got the job in the first place. So there's something to be said for, yes, there's truth in the idea that some guys are just better coordinators or better X's and O's guys or whatever, and some guys are better coaches. There's a big question mark with a guy like Udinski, a guy like Scheelhaase, that they can cover that piece, that they can be the great leader of men on top of being the savvy offensive mind. There's nothing wrong with admitting that. There's nothing wrong with saying that. I would admit that and say that 20 times over, and I have no qualms about it. I can't speak to, you know what, Udinski's going to be a great coach because I know he can lead a locker room. Like I can't speak to that. I don't know. We haven't seen him do it yet. We don't know if either of these guys could be great coaches. And that's where and it probably is somewhat like just a comfortability thing with me. That's why I would lean McDermott. Because with McDermott, you know what you get. We've seen it tangibly happen. We've seen him lead a locker room. And frankly, we've seen guys, as he got fired this week, vent about how much he meant to them and how great of a coach he was and how impactful he was on certain guys' careers and the opportunities that he gave and how fair he was and how good of a man he was. Like those comments go a long way in sort of telling you how good or bad a guy is as a head coach. And I think that's evident in the way that McDermott sort of ran things in Buffalo. I've already mentioned how, again, perfect fit to sort of turn the franchise around. And yeah, again, you can accuse me of leaning into, like a recency bias thing where it's like, well, you've seen McDermott do it more recently and you know he can do it. So that's fair. But I also think like that knowing that you have that stability is an important thing for the Browns right now, because you're trying to build this team that's getting very young, very fast into a playoff and eventually a Super Bowl contender. I'm not saying that a guy like Udinski or Scheelhaase can't take them there and get to that point eventually. Again, we just don't know. But I've certainly seen McDermott get them to that he has gotten them to the brink of Super Bowls. And I think Browns fans would long for that. They would long for an opportunity. So all this to say, like, because we have the tangible evidence, yes, it's a little bit more safe. But I would, if you were asking me, do you want the veteran coach that's proven it, that's out there on the market available right now in Sean McDermott, or one of these young guys, I would lean McDermott for the reasons I laid out. That doesn't mean Grant Udinski or Nate Scheelhaase might not be a good coach. I just think there's a big risk involved in picking one of those guys. And by the way, it might end up being the route that they take. They might be willing to take that risk, and they might hire Grant Udinski. They might hire Nate Scheelhaase, and we'll have to sort of see what the results are and live with it. And it might work out to be the greatest decision the organization's ever made. We'll find out if that's what happens. But for me, I'm plenty comfortable making Sean McDermott the guy, and I'd be plenty comfortable with him as the head coach here, and I would be in favor of making him the head coach over some of the other names that are on the list right now, because I think he's a damn good football coach, and he would bring a lot of what he brought to Buffalo in terms of establishing a culture here to Cleveland and start getting this organization going in the right direction, which is at least what they need right now. They need somebody who can get them going in the right direction, and I don't know right now if it's worth that risk to bank on one of these young guys might be able to do it. I just think, it's almost like a hope and a prayer, and it might work out. I'm not saying you can't. You have to take risks and chances sometimes in the sport. I mean, look what the Rams did with Sean McVay, and he's been a pretty damn good coach. They're on the brink of going to another Super Bowl for the third time in his tenure. But, I also like the sure thing, and it feels like Sean McDermott is a sure thing available out there on the market right now. Another episode down with you, Dog Pound. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe button. Make Locked On Browns your first listen every day, wherever you get your podcasts, and at the Locked On Browns YouTube channel. Also, if you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. Get Locked On Browns ad-free, plus members-only Discord access and more. Just go to lockedonbrowns.supercast.com or check the link in the show notes to learn more. We also implore you to keep it local. Check out Locked On Cavs or Locked On Guardians. Thank you for being an Everydayer at the Locked On Podcast Network. I will talk to you on Thursday. See you, Cleveland.